Real. Mama. Elias dropped to his knees. God help me, he whispered, gathering both into his arms. The woman's eyelids fluttered. Her voice was hoarse and cracked. Don't let them take her. Stay with me, Elias said, pressing his coat around them. His horse stamped nervously nearby, as if sensing the urgency. Elias climbed into the saddle with the bundle pressed to his chest. The woman's weight and the baby's fragile warmth made every gallop a gamble, but he pushed Thunder harder than ever before. Hold on, he whispered, though he didn't know if he was speaking to the child, the woman, or himself. By the time he thundered into town, people stopped mid-step, mouths open. Elias had never ridden with such wildness, coat flapping, eyes burning with desperation. He swung down outside Dr. Josiah Pike's small white office and kicked the door open. The doctor spilled his coffee, startled, until Elias roared, "Help them! Now!" The baby was limp, her head lolling. The obese bride sagged in Elias's arms like she'd already crossed halfway to death. Dr. Pike cleared his desk, his voice snapping into urgency. Blankets, now. He checked the baby first, rubbing her chest, coaxing shallow breaths. Elias couldn't breathe himself until he heard the faintest whimper rise from her lips. The sound was like a spark in darkness. The woman stirred faintly, gasping as Dr. Pike pressed water to her lips. Her eyes blinked open, gray, weary, terrified. She looked at Elias as if she knew him already. They wanted us gone, she rasped. Said I was shame. Said the baby, unworthy. Her chest shook with sobs she was too weak to release. Elias felt rage burn in his chest. Who would bind a woman like this, bound, helpless, hidden in a sack like garbage? And who could look at a newborn and choose to silence her before her life even began? Dr. Pike's hands worked quickly, wrapping the child in warm cloth, checking the mother's pulse. She's alive, the doctor said at last, though his face was grim. But barely. They both need constant care. Whoever did this meant for them to die. Elias brushed damp strands of hair from the woman's face. What's your name? He asked softly. Her lips trembled. Clara, she whispered. Then her eyes dropped to the baby, voice breaking into something both fierce and tender. Her name is Mercy. The child stirred again, tiny fingers gripping Elias's shirt as if choosing him, as if refusing to let go. And in that small, fragile grip, something inside the lonely rancher cracked open, something he thought was dead forever. Then Mercy it is, he whispered, holding both mother and daughter close. He didn't know it yet, but that moment had already placed him on a collision course with men whose money and power stretched across the whole county. Men who would not forgive Mercy for surviving. Elias barely slept the first night. Every creak of the ranch house made him startle awake, afraid Mercy's breathing had stopped, afraid Clara's chest would no longer rise. The old lantern burned low, filling the room with warm flickers as wind pressed against the walls. Clara lay on the spare bed he'd dragged near the fire, her body shivering under heavy quilts. Elias sat in the rocker by her side, Mercy cradled against his chest. Each time the baby's tiny lungs fought for air, each whimper that slipped from her throat, it carved deeper into him than any wound a branding iron ever left. By morning, Clara's eyes opened, weary but alive. She watched Elias with the child, and for a moment there was something unreadable in her gaze, hope mixed with fear. He shifted awkwardly, handing Mercy back. She held on, he said gruffly, though his voice cracked like dry timber. Clara's fingers brushed her daughter's cheek, tears streaking her face. They told me she didn't deserve to breathe. They said I was too much woman, too much shame. They paid men to finish it. Her voice broke. But she called me Mama before she even had strength. How can something so small fight so hard, when all I could do was pray? Elias clenched his jaw, fury rising hot. Those men who did this, they'll answer for it. I swear. But even as he spoke, he knew the truth. The family behind this crime wasn't just any family. Whispers had already reached him in town, the Hales. Wealthy, connected, their ranch stretching wider than most could imagine. No law in the county dared cross them without consequences. Over the next days, Elias and Clara learned each other through necessity. He stumbled through changing cloths and warming milk by the fire. She guided him gently, her trembling hands surprisingly steady when teaching him how to test the temperature against his wrist. Their words were few, but the silence between them softened. Mercy's cries became their language, pulling them close whether they wished it or not. One evening, as Elias chopped wood by lantern light, Clara spoke from the porch. "You don't have to keep us here. You've already done enough." He leaned on the axe, sweat on his brow, staring at her framed by shadows. "You think I'd let you walk back into the arms of the people who tried to drown you? Not a chance." Clara shook her head, clutching Mercy tighter. "You don't understand. They'll come. They won't stop. To them, I'm nothing. And Mercy, she's proof of a scandal. They'll bury us again, and this time no one will find us." Elias stepped closer, his voice low, steady. "Then they'll have to go through me first." The wind carried silence between them, heavy and dangerous, but something shifted in Clara's eyes. For the first time, she didn't look like a woman waiting to die. She looked like a mother daring to hope. 2 nights later, proof of her fear arrived. Sheriff Ruth Carver rode up under cover of dark, boots crunching gravel. Her face was tight, her hat pulled low. "I came straight to you," she said. Word spreading. The Hales are asking questions in town about a missing bride. And they're men, armed, restless. They're offering a reward for anyone who speaks up. Clara's breath caught, her knuckles white against Mercy's blanket. Elias moved in front of her instinctively, his broad frame a shield. "What did you tell them?" he demanded. Ruth glanced toward the baby, then back to Elias. "That I hadn't heard a thing. But you don't have long. If they put their money where their mouths are, someone will betray you. You'd better be ready." After she left, the cabin fell into silence but for the crackle of firewood. Clara sat in the rocker, Mercy nestled against her chest, humming a broken lullaby. Elias watched her from the shadows, the sound of that lullaby wrapping around him like something he hadn't felt in years, home. But under that fragile peace, the truth pulsed like a warning drum. The Hales weren't just powerful. They were merciless. And when they came for Clara and Mercy, Elias knew it wouldn't just be a matter of law. It would be a fight for their lives. The storm broke the way Clara always feared it would. The Hale carriage rolled into town at midday, black as a coffin, wheels slicing through the dust like blades. Elias stood outside Dr. Pike's office, hat pulled low, Mercy balanced on his arm, Clara behind him with fear stiff in her spine. When Edward Hale stepped down from that carriage, his silver hair gleamed in the sun, and his eyes swept the street like a man who believed he owned it. Beside him walked his son, Thomas, the groom who had discarded Clara like spoiled meat. His face was pale, his jaw tight, but not with shame. With arrogance. The crowd hushed as Hale's voice rang out. "You have something that belongs to my family." Elias didn't move. He rocked Mercy gently, the baby pressing her face into his shirt as if she could feel the weight of danger. "What I have," Elias said, his voice steady, "is a woman you bound in a sack and left to drown. And a child you wanted dead before she could even take a breath." Gasps rippled through the crowd, but Hale only sneered. "Careful, rancher. That child is my blood, my son's daughter. You think you can keep her from her rightful place? You and this obese fraud." His words cut like knives. Clara flinched, but Elias stepped closer, shielding her with his frame. "Blood doesn't make family," Elias shot back. "Love does. And neither of you knows the meaning of it." Hale's hand sliced through the air, signaling his lawyer forward. "We'll see what Judge Parker thinks of that." 3 days later, the courthouse overflowed. Farmers, merchants, wives, children, everybody came to watch the fight. At one table sat Edward Hale, Thomas, and their slick Dallas lawyer, polished boots shining. At the other, Elias, Clara, and old Tom Bradley, the only lawyer they could afford, a man better at drafting wills than fighting giants. Mercy sat on Clara's lap, fussing, pulling at her mother's dress. The Dallas lawyer opened smooth, his voice oiled with confidence. "This is simple, Your Honor. My client seeks custody of his granddaughter. Her mother," he gestured coldly to Clara, "is unfit, both in health and in judgment. She deceived my client's son, disgraced his family, and has no means to raise a child. Clara's chest trembled, but Elias reached under the table, covering her hand with his. "He's wrong," he whispered. "We'll show them." When Tom Bradley rose, his papers shook in his hand, but his words struck true. "Your Honor, my clients saved this child's life. They found her tied in a sack, floating in Miller's Creek, while the Hale family spread lies about her death. This was no misunderstanding. This was an attempt to erase 2 lives from the earth." Murmurs filled the room. Judge Parker raised a hand for silence. "Proceed." Clara took the stand. Her voice quaked at first, then grew steady. She spoke of the night she was lured to the carriage, of Thomas's sneer, of the rope tightening around her wrists. She described mercy pressed against her, the cold water soaking through, her prayer that someone, anyone, would hear her child's voice. By the end, tears ran down faces in the crowd. Then came Elias. His voice was rough as gravel, but every word hit like iron. He told of finding them, of hearing that tiny voice cry, "Mama," of holding life itself in his arms when he thought all hope in the world was gone. "She calls me Papa now," he said, turning toward Clara, "and every time she does, it heals something I thought would never mend." The Dallas lawyer tried to tear them apart, pressing Clara about her weight, her poverty, her lack of family. "What can you give this child?" he jeered. Clara lifted her chin. A mother who would die before letting her be thrown away again. Isn't that enough? And then Mercy, restless from the long hours, reached for Clara's face and spoke. The courtroom fell silent as her small, raspy voice broke through the hush. "Mama!" Tears spilled down Clara's cheeks as she kissed her daughter's hair. Even Judge Parker had to remove his glasses to compose himself. When he returned his gaze, his voice was steady but warm. "I've served 30 years, and I've never seen clearer proof of where a child belongs. This court rules in favor of Clara Whitfield and Elias Ward. The Hales petition is denied." Cheers erupted, boots stamping the wooden floor. Edward Hale's face turned red, his power slipping away as quickly as his control over the room. Thomas hung his head, shame finally seeping through the cracks of his pride. Elias gathered Clara and Mercy, his arms strong around them both. Outside the courthouse, the sun broke through storm clouds, spilling gold across the dirt street. Clara leaned into him, whispering through tears, "They called me shame. You made me bride. You made me mother again." Elias kissed the top of her head, his voice low but certain. "You were never a burden, Clara. You and Mercy, you're my family now." And as the crowd watched the 3 of them walk away together, the sack that was meant to be their grave had become the beginning of their life. The courthouse doors swung open, and sunlight poured onto the street as Elias held Clara close. Mercy pressed between them. The baby cooed softly, her tiny hand gripping Clara's dress like she knew she'd just been saved. People spilled out after them, buzzing with what they'd witnessed. Some wiped tears, some whispered prayers, others simply stood in awe. They had all seen a miracle, love win where power had tried to crush it. But Elias wasn't thinking about the crowd. He was thinking about the woman beside him, the bride the world had mocked, the mother they had tried to erase. Clara's tears streaked her cheeks, but her eyes, those gray, wounded eyes, held a light now, a light that had been buried under years of cruelty. She whispered so quietly he almost missed it. "I thought I was nothing. I thought Mercy would grow up never knowing her mother's love." Elias stopped in the middle of the street. Dust swirled around their boots, the sound of the crowd fading behind them. He tilted Clara's chin until she met his gaze. "You are not nothing. You are the strongest woman I've ever known. And that child will never go a day without love, not as long as I breathe." For a moment the world hushed. Just them, the baby, and the heartbeat of a town that had finally seen the truth. Clara's breath hitched, and then she leaned her forehead against his chest, shoulders trembling. It wasn't weakness. It was release. Years of shame melting into the arms of a man who refused to see her as less than worthy. Months passed. The Hales' influence crumbled, their names spoken more in scorn than respect. Thomas vanished west, too ashamed to remain. Edward Hale sulked in his mansion, stripped of the power he once wielded like a whip. But Elias's ranch came alive again. Laughter replaced silence. Clara's voice carried through the fields as she sang to Mercy while hanging laundry in the sun. Elias found himself carving wooden toys late at night, his rough hands creating delicate horses, tiny dolls, anything that made Mercy giggle. And every time Clara thanked him, her smile carried a warmth that turned his lonely cabin into a home. They were no longer three broken souls clinging to survival. They were a family. 6 months later, the church bell rang for a wedding no one in town would forget. Clara walked down the aisle in a dress she had sewn herself, her steps slow but sure. The whispers that once mocked her sighs were gone, replaced by cheers, by tears, by the undeniable proof of her strength. Mercy, dressed in white with wildflowers in her curls, toddled ahead as the flower girl, laughing as she scattered petals. When the preacher asked if anyone objected, Mercy shouted, "Mama! Papa!" and clapped her tiny hands, sending ripples of laughter through the pews. Elias's eyes filled as he took Clara's hand, his voice steady. "You were abandoned once. Never again. From this day forward, you are my bride. My partner. My heart." And when he kissed her, the crowd rose to their feet. Not out of duty, out of joy, out of awe at the sight of two people the world had tried to break, standing whole because they had chosen love over shame, courage over fear. Years later, when Mercy was old enough to ask about the sack in the creek, Clara would kneel beside her bed and tell her the story. She never hid the pain, never softened the cruelty. But she always ended the same way. They tried to throw us away, but love pulled us out. And that love gave us a family stronger than any rope, any river, or any lie. Mercy would smile, curl against her pillow, and whisper the word that had saved her life once before. "Mama." And every night, as Elias stood in the doorway listening, Clara would look down at their daughter and whisper back with a trembling smile, "Always, Mercy. Always." Because the sack that was meant to bury them had become the cradle of a new beginning. And sometimes the voices the world tries hardest to silence are the ones that echo loudest across time, reminding us that love, when chosen, cannot be killed. The twist you're about to see is only the beginning. Subscribe and tap the bell so YouTube tells you the second the next story drops.